Welcome to Walk Away Wealthy. I'm your host, Alan Terrell Gregory. If you're thinking of selling your existing business or looking to untangle yourself from your old business so you can start a new one, you came to the right place. Today, I have a very special guest, Graham Falbo. Welcome to the show,
Th-
Graham.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I'm originally from Virginia, work up here in New Jersey now at Hudson Point Capital, father of three, and was previously at a large wirehouse. Spent most of my career as a financial advisor and financial planner there, and was lucky enough to move over to Hudson Point to spearhead the wealth management piece, the comprehensive wealth management piece that I had done for years prior, and really be able to do that with some unique alternatives here. So we're really excited and certainly excited to have met you and be a part of this podcast.
How and why did you get started helping business owners with retirement?
Sure. So a couple different reasons. So I actually come from, my parents were entrepreneurs, small business owners. So they ran a dental practice together, actually down in Virginia. So for anybody who's listening to this who would then say, well, why didn't you become a dentist? I would say, sit around my dinner table growing up and tell me whether or not you actually want to be a dentist. But having them and having that entrepreneurial spirit, and really not until I got into my role and kind of my career as a financial advisor and financial planner, did I truly understand all of the different hurdles, obstacles that they went through individually and together, both as small business owners, both on the entry into and the exit out of their business and their practice. And then, interestingly enough, seeing kind of a difference in how that really worked itself out in terms of one staying with the new practice and things of that sort. So, from a very high level, it was really ingrained in me to always have business owners kind of close to my heart, something that I grew up with. And then me as a financial planner, it's so much of a story to be able to help somebody that is a business owner, not just because these individuals may make a lot of money or anything like that. It's really comes down to overall planning and balancing somebody's overall balance sheet and net worth, and really and planning for the future. And there are so many different things that can go right, but can also go wrong early on in a business owner's life, mid stage, exit, after exit, all these different things, both from a personal level, from a financial level. So there's so many ins and outs. And it's really something that I enjoy doing and enjoy having these conversations about.
So, quick question here. What's the difference between a financial advisor and a financial planner?
Great question. So I would argue that most financial planners are financial advisors in a sense. Financial advisors typically silo themselves in the investment, focusing on diversification, focusing on asset allocation, still may focus on goals, whether short or medium. I would say financial planners may take it a step further. And it always doesn't have to be a nice, neat, really ingrained financial plan and book that they're going to set on their coffee table and have and be able to go through once a year or once every couple of years or anything like that. It doesn't have to be that formalized. But in my opinion, why I use the two interchangeably for myself is, as a certified financial planner, I am a financial planner. Right. That is being able to have these conversations with people and kind of almost the behavioral finance aspect of things and understanding what somebody's short, medium, long-term goals are, both with themselves, with their business, with their family, both younger generation and sometimes older generation. All those things come into a plan and telling a story. And ultimately, the money that they're saving, have saved, or that they're earning is all funding those goals. Usually, those goals are some type of expense, right? New house, a second home, putting my kids through college, helping my parents who may be elderly and not have the same savings, helping them with healthcare costs or whatever those different things are. it all is part of a plan. I would say the advising piece is more than on not necessarily what stocks to buy or anything like that. There are still advisors who fancy themselves as stock pickers, and that is fine. I would argue that a properly diversified portfolio, in whatever sense that means, really is ultimately where you want to get to. And that's where the advising piece really comes in. So almost the implementation versus the story that you're helping put together.
And how does that tie in with the SEPA?
Sure. So interestingly enough, so I have three kids. I got my CFP when my daughter was born. I got my CIMA, my Chartered Investment Management Analyst designation when my son was born because I wanted to really become better in the investment area. It was something that I felt like I was good at, but I wanted to be great at. So that's what I did there. Right before COVID officially started in terms of lockdowns and things like that, we had our third. So it was time for another designation. The SEPA had come across, in all seriousness, the SEPA had come across from another colleague of mine. And we were working a lot with business owners at the time because we're planners. And planners tend to have a really good impact on a business owner from a financial planning perspective. Now I feel super confident being on the other side of the table, not just with a prospect as a business owner, but with their CPA, with their attorney, being able to sit on the same side of the table as them. If I can sit on the same side of the table with the client and their CPA and their state attorney and add value, then the client knows that they've chosen the right financial planner.
What are some of the common challenges business owners face when thinking about retirement?
So, from my background, both with not only my parents, but just the individual business owners that I've worked with in the past, so much of retirement can seem like a fleeting idea in the sense of when you start this business, whatever it is, it's with an idea and with a passion. And your whole goal is generally to just continue to grow that and increase that, gain clients or expand in some way, shape, or form. So normally the business owner is really not making a lot of money and saving a lot of money early on in their career. It's almost like there's a lot of venture capital and things like that in terms of the investment space. You think of it almost like a really early company where generally speaking, their revenues and their profits are going back into the business to grow it. But at some point, they're able to start saving. They're making more than they actually need to put back in the business. So now all of a sudden, they've got a little bit of savings and they're living a better lifestyle and they're enjoying the fruits of their labor, which is great. Where the problem lies is now you've got this business that is taking off, and on your balance sheet, the business in and of itself is such a huge portion of your overall net worth, it can almost outpace. It's like picking one really good stock that just continues to go up and up and you never sell it. And then you continue to save into other things, but they don't pace that other stock or any other investment. So then 5, 10 years down the road, all of a sudden you have this thing on your balance sheet, this entity, your business that is 80, 90% of your overall net worth. And that's great, especially if it's doing well. But just like any singular stock or any singular investment, if it goes haywire, all of a sudden your net worth, 90% of your net worth is tied to that one thing. And that's where it can be really detrimental to somebody from a planning perspective. So those missteps are some of the hangups that I see.
So, how can owners unlock some of the wealth that's trapped in their business?
So there's a multitude of different ways, and really where the financial planning piece comes in. And so much of it is what do you want? What do you want the business to be at your retirement? And what does retirement look like to you? And this is a conversation not just with business owners that we have, but it's a conversation with everybody. I also think the whole idea of retirement is starting to shift a little bit on its head generationally. Like the idea of I go to college, I'm going to get a job, I stay with that job, I stay with that company for my entire career, and then at 60 or 65 or whatever it is, I retire, I get a pension, and those days aren't there. So now there's mobility within companies corporately and all these other things. Well, some people want to work until they're 45 or 50, and then maybe they'll take a step back and do almost like this semi-retirement job, whether depending on their level of expertise, maybe there's a consulting opportunity, maybe there's an opportunity to just do something else that kind of pays some of the bills, but they've been able to save and really grind away early in their career to a point where they don't have to they don't have to have that same grind that they did prior. So that didn't directly answer the question about business owners, but really the idea is just around the conversation. So where the value that I feel like I bring in terms of sitting down with a business owner is just understanding what it is that they want. And so let's go through a couple of those. So there's one scenario where an individual starts a business and maybe they were already married or they get married and then they have kids. And let's say they're like me, have 3 kids. And one of those kids really loves the business of XYZ that I do. The other two maybe respect what I do, maybe don't care, whatever it is, want to do their own thing. Let's just use some numbers here. So let's say my business is worth $50 million. Okay. So let's say one of my children wants to take over that business. Well, they're going to step into, and depending on how I want to work that, whether they start from the bottom and work their way up, or do I have a partner that should be in line to take over when I retire? How am I unlocking the amount of money that I've built up over this time to essentially sell that business to somebody? Because more than likely that partner or other individual won't have $50 million just give me to walk away. Mm-hmm. So how do you create liquidity for that person? How do you create that sale while also still creating the continuity for the business to sustain? And then if I have the son or daughter who wants to get into the business, how am I ensuring that the other two are made whole from a financial standpoint? If their interests lie elsewhere, would it be fair that if I were to pass away one day, then one person's getting a $50 million business, the other two are left without, right? And does that matter? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. And those are all very unique and individual questions that each business owner and family dynamic has. There's a ton of different things there. And that's one area of the question, right? Do you want to sell and walk away? You view this as not a house flip by any means, but it's you put your time in, you gave it your all, you grew it, you did this really great thing, you checked all the boxes, and you're tired and you want to walk away. Maybe you care what happens, maybe you don't, but you want to walk away. And if that's the case, there's certainly a multitude of different things that there's, depending on the size of the business, there's obviously the public markets, there's mergers and acquisitions from maybe competitors or larger companies that maybe could leverage you and what it is that you do there, or maybe there's other conglomerates in the space that could use you and want to buy out your firm. And depending on the space, there's a lot of that, especially in the medical practice arena. And I know that from personal experience. My parents sold their dental practice to a individual, and her business was buying up dental practices, bringing in a younger dentist, usually relatively fresh out of school, who would then kind of work on a salary and slowly maybe gain equity into the business. So there's a ton of different ways of going about it, but it ultimately comes back to, what do you want? Do you want the business to continue? Who do you want it to continue with? How much do you want to be involved? Because that's another big thing. One of the nice things about being a business owner is, for the most part, you're not really answering to a boss. You are essentially the boss, right? By selling, you've given that up. As difficult as that may seem, the idea of getting that check or whatever the compensation looks like is kind of a way of removing that boss title from you. And from a behavioral finance and personal mental health area, it's tough for a lot of different people. I saw that with my parents. My mother stayed on and helped with the transition. My dad chose to fully retire. And I saw certainly a difference between the two of them, because she saw something that she had built up and she saw a lot of things being changed and different things like that she had done. Now, it could have been better for the business longer term economically or whatever, but it wasn't the same thing that she had done. So there's a myriad of ways that this can go right and go wrong, but ultimately it starts with the question of what it is that you want as a business owner. What do you want for the business long term, and who do you want it to be with, and what part do you want to play in it?
And do you find that owners are typically open to these types of conversations, or do you have to massage it a little bit?
I think the idea that you are going to have this singular conversation with a business owner is fleeting. It is not something that they've thought about. They may claim that they have thought about it, but the idea that they've truly thought about it in depth, I think, is usually not, I won't say 100% of the time, right? Never say never. But I would say and argue that most have not really thought this in depthly about all these different things.
How much time is needed to plan and execute a successful exit for a business owner?
Depends on where they are on the spectrum of these decisions. So if we've had the conversations around what it is that they want to do, and there's a clear outline of this person is going to take over, and this is how much money that they have and are going to be able to put in, and all these different things like are done on the front end. Usually, I would say at least a year or two. There's a very rare scenario where somebody has all their ducks in a row, is ready to raise their hand and say, I'm done. And that there is a qualified buyer or partner or some financing option or exit plan in place that is going to get them not only the most capital, but get them the right exit plan. Usually that doesn't happen. And sometimes it is a function of shifting from one type of corporation to a different type of corporation in order to do something different. Or in the case of an ESOP, making sure that those things are set up properly. I mean, that takes a while because there's attorneys involved and all these other things, and banks and lending and all these other things that are involved in that process. Just picking on that one in particular, there are a ton of things that need to be set up and done in a kind of methodical manner. It takes time. And there's a lot of people that usually get involved in these things. So I would say a solid year.
Often when I say this to people, they get it. So just because you say you're ready to sell doesn't mean you're actually truly ready to sell.
1,000%. It's like I said, the idea that somebody is ready to raise their hand and say, I'm good, I'm done, and then actually have an exit that is going to be their best and most profitable option and best for the company or whatever it is that their goals are, that's 1 in a million type of thing. If you think about it like this, if they are ready to raise their hand and say, I'm done, and they've been leading this company, normally that means that they're tired or they're run down or whatever. That's usually going to be reflected in the performance of the underlying company that they're leading, right? So you almost have to pull these ideas out of them. And to be clear, my goal in these conversations is not to force anybody to exit. It is just to get the conversation started because you start thinking about these things.
Well, another question here is, what role does taxes play in not just exit planning, but the liquidity event itself?
Taxes are a paramount thing. And nobody's trying to evade or anything like that. It's just a matter of making sure that the government gets theirs, but doing so in a way that your net is still going to be worthwhile. So there's a ton of different ways of structuring it and setting those things up that are going to be favorable. Same thing goes to investing. Same thing goes to passing money to heirs. It's the same general idea. When somebody passes away with a large estate, the government is going to get theirs. And ultimately, you have to decide in terms of planning for that, how much the government's going to get and how much your heirs are going to get, or maybe a charitable organization or philanthropic organization that you want is going to get. But all of those things can be done if we're planning in anticipation of that. Then you can do a little bit more bifurcation of, well, the government is definitely going to get this much. If I want to ensure that my kids get this much or my heirs get this much, then I need to do X, Y, and Z. And the same general thesis goes around business owners and their sale. If I need this much money net to feel like I succeeded in this transaction, or if I do a financial plan and I know that I need this much money to live off of and be super comfortable and really enjoy the fruits of my labor, then knowing that the government's going to get theirs, I certainly need to net out a certain number. So maybe that changes the overall kind of gross number that it's sold for, or the transaction itself, whether it's a private equity buyout versus an ESOP versus some other option. So those are all the different things that come into play. And that's where bringing in a CPA is certainly incredibly impactful for those conversations.
Got it. All right. So we're going to go lightning round. I got 5 more questions for you here. The first one is, what does working with you look like?
So I would say it is unique to you, right? There are individuals that come to me with money to invest, feel like they have a good sense of short, medium, maybe some long-term goals. And we can talk about those over time, but maybe it's a little bit more on the front end. I just need to get invested. We had a liquidity event. Let's just get some money in the market and deal with kind of the other stuff. This is our risk tolerance and things of that sort. Or it's somebody that has amassed some wealth. And they want to look for different ideas, maybe for planning for next generation or some differentiated investments or whatever it is. Maybe it's more of a conversation around planning and true goal setting and am I going to be okay? Or what's my number, right? What's the number that I need to retire? I'm late 30s, early 40s. I'm already burnt out. What do I need to work towards? And I've been getting that conversation a lot lately, right? Which I think is interesting. But I think it's unique to the individual. And I think ultimately what you get from me and what you get from Hudson Point is a unique, customizable kind of white glove service, really tailored to what it is that you need. We have a full suite of offerings. It's just a function of what it is that you want. It's more a la carte than it is the buffet.
Nice. So what characteristics do your best clients exhibit?
That's a great question. I think transparency is one. I can't help without them sharing. So if something new is coming up, good, bad, or indifferent, sharing those items with me so that if something needs to be changed or altered along the way is certainly helpful and impactful. There's certainly trust that I need to develop, and communication really, I think, is the biggest one. And that kind of relates back to trust, where if they're trusting me with being their fiduciary of their assets, then ensuring that we have that symbiotic relationship of them trusting me to make the right moves, but at the same time, having the transparency of online servicing and things like that, where they can see the different things that I'm doing and I'm communicating with them. Those are also incredibly helpful. So I would say communication is huge, and just being transparent are certainly helpful.
What's your best advice for someone looking to sell their business or transition to a new one?
I would say certainly just talk with somebody. Find somebody to talk with, and outside of your space. And it doesn't have to be necessarily the SEPA or any business broker or anybody else. It just has to be somebody to have a conversation with, to ensure that you're doing the right thing. It's the same thing with almost anything in life that you start out new. Being a new parent, I read all these books. Did they really help? Probably not. You're kind of thrown into it anyway, but you at least have confidence of being able to kind of go through the mental Rolodex of, oh, I did read about this, and now I'll know what to do, or at least guide me along the way. But I do think, as we've kind of alluded to throughout our conversation, having these conversations early and often, not when you think you see the light at the end of the tunnel. When you think you see the light at the end of the tunnel, you're already late for the conversation. So being open and honest about that, I think is really impactful.
All right. So now we're down to the last 2 questions here. So this one is,
Sure.
what's one of your favorite quotes and why?
Well, speaking of time, my offensive line coach in college always used to say, if you're 5 minutes early, you're on time. And if you're on time, you're late. Coach, he's since passed, and he was a wonderful mentor of mine. So there's a ton of quotes from him, but that was always one. And frankly, from a professional perspective and being a little bit more serious about it, it's doing unto others as you want done to you. And it goes down to how you treat people on the street. It goes into how I operate in my business. And I think those attributes are huge, not only in this business, but just in life.
And last one here is, how can people get in touch with you?
Sure. So my email is my first name, Graham, Graham at hudsonpoint.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. Those are the two best places to reach out. And yeah, always willing to have a conversation.
Well, Graham, thank you so much for being on. I appreciate you.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
All right.